GoForThe2.com. We're into the Week 9 predictions for the college football season. What can you say? But week number 8, another great weekend of college football. That's what makes this great game so special. We have some interesting matchups on tap. Keep in mind, this is when teams strive for bowl appearances. Teams that are 500 give it their best shot. So you got to keep that into mind. Sometimes you have to throw out the statistical information. Sometimes you have to go with it. And we're going to give you the Week 9 predictions right now. Let's get right into it. Virginia Tech and Boston College. I've been high on Boston College all year. I picked them last week against Louisville. They lost that matchup 17-14 on the road. Offensively, they did not generate a lot of total yards, but their defense kept them in the matchup. They blocked a punt for a touchdown, scored, got within 3, but could not crack through for the victory on the road. They now come back home and face a team in Virginia Tech that lost in 4 overtimes to Duke. So where will Virginia Tech be in this matchup? I think they're very focused and ready for this game. I think when you look at Virginia Tech overall, they have the offensive weapons to really stretch BC's defense and more importantly, put a lot of pressure on that BC offense. This BC offense is only averaging 104 passing yards per game. Michael Brewer, the Virginia Tech quarterback, came back last week, threw for 3 touchdowns, got acclimated into the system, had a breakout performance against a solid defense in the Duke Blue Devils. He now goes on the road. I expect Virginia Tech to really dominate this matchup, put a lot of pressure on that BC offense that's sort of one-dimensional with the rushing attack. Virginia Tech has players on the defensive end. They have a veteran secondary in Kendall Fuller that can really step up and make plays against Boston College should they take to the air. So I think defensively, this favors Virginia Tech, and I think Virginia Tech gets a solid road victory. I think they're able to put up points on Boston College, and I think they break through for a marquee victory. I think it's 31-14 on the road. Virginia Tech gets the victory over Boston College this coming weekend. Another interesting matchup is Texas travels to Ames, Iowa to take on Iowa State. Over the last 5 years, Texas is 4-0 and has won all 4 games by an average margin of victory at 13.2 points per game. You look at this Texas defense overall in the last 2 games against Kansas State and Oklahoma, this defense has an awakening, a revival. They have 11 sacks over the last 2 games, 18 sacks total on the year. But more importantly, they're much, much better against the run. They held Kansas State in check last week to around 250 total yards of offense. The week before against Oklahoma held that high-octane Oklahoma Sooners offense to 278 total yards. The rushing game got going against a solid Kansas State defensive front. They rushed for 274 rushing yards on the Wildcats last week, and I think that's the difference heading on the road to Ames, Iowa. Iowa State has a solid quarterback in Sam Richardson, but offensive coordinator Mark Mangini did get fired this week. A lot of offensive inconsistencies for the Cyclones, and I think Texas is bought in to Charlie Strong's system. Defensively, he'll have this team ready, and look for them to shut down Sam Richardson and get a quality road victory. This is a 3-4 Texas Longhorn team that's striving to be 500. This is a Big 12 game, so this will look good on their resume, and I think the Texas Longhorns do get a dominating road victory. I think they win this game, I'd say in the area of 14-17 points. I think it's a 34-17 victory by Texas on the road. Tyrone Swoops and Hurd are way too much for that Cyclones defense. This is a Cyclones defense that's allowing 187 rushing yards per game. Texas running the football very well. Offensive line has cohesiveness, and I think Charlie Strong and the crew get a dominating road victory, 34-17 over the Cyclones this weekend. Another interesting matchup, undefeated Clemson coming off a 58-0 victory over Miami. They travel now to NC State. This is a tough environment in Raleigh. When you look at Clemson overall, Clemson's dominated This series over the last 5 years, they're 4-1 over the Wolfpack by an average margin of victory of 17 points per game. But this is a very underrated NC State defense. They have a solid quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. They lost this game last year 41-0. The offensive line got outmanned by Vic Beasley in that defensive front. But this is an underrated NC State defense. They're only giving up around 109 rushing yards per game, and more importantly, only 144 passing yards per game. They rebounded after back-to-back losses to Virginia Tech and Louisville. They rebounded very nicely last week against Wake Forest. That's a solid ACC victory. It's a road victory. Won that game 35-17 on the road. They now come back home. This is back-to-back road games for the Clemson Tigers. I think NC State has the offense and defensive lines to play with Clemson. I think they push the Tigers to the limit. They have a solid running back in Matthew Days, and they have a solid wide receiver core. But more importantly, it's the quarterback play of Jacoby Brissett that can keep them in this ballgame. I think they push Clemson to the limit, but in the end, the Tigers do get a 3-point victory. I don't think it's high scoring like a lot of people think. I think it's a 27-24 victory by Clemson, but it is very close. This NC State team is rushing for 212 rushing yards per game and passing for 200 yards per game. They're balanced, have a senior quarterback in Jacoby Brissett that's mobile and can give that Clemson Tigers defense some problems, and I think they push the Tigers to the limit. But in the end, Clemson stays undefeated, 27-24 over the Wolfpack. Another interesting game is Iowa and Maryland. Maryland pushed Penn State to the limit last week, 31-30, had the opportunity to win that ball game, could not do it. They played very emotional under interim head coach Loxley. He had them up and ready and played a much better game defensively. But this is a team that's still negative in turnover margin, one of the worst turnover margins in the country, second to last in FBS with -13. They're 126 of 126 total teams in FBS. They're second to last. And this is a team that's turning over the ball at an unbelievable rate. They're also giving up a lot of yards in terms of run support, giving up about 175 rushing yards per game. They're now going to be traveling to Iowa to face a very heavy offensive line. This is an offensive line that's averaging over 210 rushing yards per game. So they like to pound the football. Canzari's doubtful for this game, but Wadley, the backup running back 2 weeks ago, rushed for 204 yards and 4 touchdowns against a solid Northwestern defensive front. You look at Iowa's defense, only giving up 74 rushing yards per game. Maryland likes to run the football. They have a mobile quarterback in Hills. This defensive line, led by Nate Meyer, I think will keep him in check, and I think Iowa gets a dominating home victory. This Iowa team could possibly be a sleeper. I called for them to win their division, but they can be the best team in the Big Ten at this point. All eyes are on Ohio State and Michigan State. Iowa is a team that you have to keep an eye out for, playing very disciplined. They're winning the turnover battle each and every week, and more importantly, have a physical offense and defensive line. Quarterback Beathard's playing very well as well. They can stretch teams vertically. And I do think Iowa dominates this game. This game was 38-31 last year. I don't think it's close. Maryland, I think, gets beat up on the offense and defensive lines. Iowa gets a 48-20 victory over Maryland this coming weekend. They move to 8-0. Another interesting matchup, intriguing matchup, is Oklahoma State and Texas Tech. Texas Tech got beat up on the road last week in Norman by Oklahoma. Oklahoma State beat up on Kansas. They now travel to Lubbock. Very difficult place to play, but Oklahoma State has owned this series over the last 5 years. They're 5-0 by an average margin of victory of 28.2 points per game over the Red Raiders. They won this matchup last year by a total of 10 points. Intriguing matchup. Mason Rudolph, a solid quarterback. But you look at this Texas Tech defense right now. They're giving up 284 rushing yards per game. They're going to be going up against a very solid defense in Oklahoma State. They're second in FBS in total sacks with 27. They have the offensive weapons to play with Texas Tech. Now, this can be a shootout, but I look at this Texas Tech Red Raider defense, and the amount of rushing yards that they're giving up per game really favors Oklahoma State. I like Mike Gundy in the spot, and I like Oklahoma State's defense. I think they wear down Patrick Mahomes and the offensive line of the Red Raiders, and I think Oklahoma State does get a solid road victory. I don't think it's a dominating victory. I think it's in the area of 13 points. I think it's very high scoring. I think it's 56-43. Oklahoma State stays 8-0 and undefeated and gets a solid road victory over Texas Tech. My upset special in terms of I really think this team gets the victory on Saturday night. My upset special, Vanderbilt travels to Houston. I've been high on Houston all year long. I think they have one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in college football in Greg Ward Jr. You can't take away what Tom Herman and that offensive staff have done with this team. They're playing solid defense. They're number one in FBS in turnover margin with a plus 13 mark. Very solid in run support, only giving up 98 total rushing yards per game to their opponents. But they're facing a very upstart team in Vanderbilt that's very solid on the defensive side of the ball. Also, it's amazing when you look at Houston. They're 7-0, but they haven't beaten a team with a winning record all season long. You look at their 7 wins, they've come by a combined record of their opponents of 13-37. On the flip side, Vanderbilt has played teams like Ole Miss very tough. They beat Missouri last week. They lost to Georgia, but played them very, very tough on the defensive side of the ball. Very solid in run support. It's a contrast in styles. Houston can blow out Vanderbilt if they do jump out early and put the pressure on that Vanderbilt offense. But Vanderbilt likes to run the football. They have a solid running back in Webb. They like to pound it between the tackles. Vanderbilt's a very blue-collar team with an SEC offense and defense lines. Derek Mason, a defensive-minded head coach that had solid game plans going up against very high-octane offenses in the SEC. Teams like Georgia, teams like Ole Miss, and they were able to keep Missouri in check last week. I know it's not a high-octane offense in Missouri, but they still were able to keep that offense in check and play with the Tigers. So you look at this matchup in Houston, all statistics favor the Cougars in this game, but I like Vanderbilt to get the victory. I think they're able to implement their game style. I think they're able to run the football between the tackles with Webb, and I think this defense is playing at a high level. More importantly, this team could possibly go to a bowl. They're 3-4 on the year. This can add another victory notch in their belt and build up their resume. It's a non-conference game. I like Vanderbilt to get the upset. McCrary, their quarterback, is inconsistent, but he's been playing much better down the stretch. I think they're able to contain Greg Ward and control the tempo, and I do think that Vanderbilt gets the 30-27 victory over Houston this weekend. My upset special. Should be a very interesting week of college football. You can get all my work up on goforthechew.com. Follow my radio show on Yahoo Sports Radio Network every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. through 11 a.m. We'll break down the marquee matchups this coming weekend, including games that we didn't speak about today. So you could catch that at streamysr.com. College football is the best. I just love talking about it. Stay with me.